say that. I've never seen it. I've seen it.
In the name of Allah, the most kind and the most merciful, respected elders, Maulana, our esteemed guests, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum simply means peace be upon you, and as our Jewish friends would say, shalom, which means peace. So peace be upon you, and the way you respond is peace be upon you too. We have an interesting program today, and thank you all for joining us today at our second annual Interfaith Iftar Dinner. As we observe the holy month of Ramadan, your presence here today tells us that you are here to create a peaceful society by building bridges and getting to know each other while we break bread together. One thing is for sure, you're never going to find so many hungry Muslims in one room. So the water bottles is only for our non-Muslim friends, but after the sun goes down, Maulana has his bottle of water. We're going to start our program like we do with any Muslim program today by the recitation of the Holy Quran. I'd like to invite Brother Mohsin to come and speak a few verses from the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون أياما معدودات فمن كان منكم مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر وعلى الذين يطيقونه فدية طعام مسكين فمن تطوع خيرا فهو خير له وأن تصوموا خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصوم ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداعي إذا دعان فليستجيبوا لي وليؤمنوا بي لعلهم يرشدون أحل لكم ليلة الصيام الرفث إلى نسائكم هن لباس لكم وأنتم لباس لهن علم الله أنكم كنتم تختانون أنفسكم فتاب عليكم وعفى عنكم فالآن باشروهن وابتغوا ما كتب الله لكم وكلوا واشربوا حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر ثم أتموا الصيام إلى الليل ولا تباشروهن وأنتم عاكفون وأنتم عاكفون في المساجد تلك حدود الله فلا تقربوها كذلك يبين الله آياته للناس لعلهم يتقون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you, Brother Mohsin, for the wonderful recitation of the Holy Quran. We recited in Arabic because it was revealed in Arabic, but at the same time we want to know what the meaning is, and I'd like to call upon Salma to come and read the meaning for what was recited right now.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I seek refuge from Allah. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. O you who believe, fasting is prescribed for you, as it was prescribed for those before you, so that you may guard against evil. For a certain number of days, but whoever among you is sick or on a journey, then he shall fast a like number of other days. Those who are not able to do it may effect a redemption by feeding a poor man. So whoever does good spontaneously, it is better for him, and that you fast is better for you if you know. The month of Ramadan is that in which the Quran was revealed, a guidance to men and clear proof of guidance and distinction. Therefore, whoever of you is present in this month, he shall fast therein. And whoever is sick or upon a journey, then he shall fast a like number of other days. Allah desires ease for you, and He does not desire to have difficulty for you. He desires that you should complete the number of fasts, and that you should exalt the greatness of Allah for His having guided you, and that you may give thanks. And when my servants ask you concerning me, then surely I am near. I answer the prayer of the suppliant when he calls on me. So they should answer my call and believe in me, that they may walk in the right way. It is made lawful to you to go into your wives on the night of the fast. They are an apparel for you, and you are an apparel for them. Allah knew that you acted unfaithfully to yourselves, so He has turned to you mercifully, and removed from you this burden. So now be in contact with them, and seek what Allah has ordained for you, and eat and drink, until the whiteness of the day becomes distinct from the blackness of the night. Then complete the fast till night, and have no contact with them, while you keep to the mosques. These are the limits of Allah. So do not go near them. Thus does Allah make His commands clear for men, that they may guard against evil.
Thank you, Salma. We have our program for today. We'll start it out, followed by our panel discussion led by our guests and our resident alim. And before we start, I'd like to call upon our resident alim, Maulana Sayyid Hadi Yassin. He's the Imam of our center here at the Islamic Center of Zahra in Pleasanton. A little bit about himself. He has attended Islamic seminary in Iran for 12 years. On a professional side, he is a certified professional coach specializing in children, parenting, and family relationships, and has a master's degree in clinical psychology. So he is a great asset to our community, and we always look up to him for guidance, and thank you for being our leader. With the loud salawat, I'd like to welcome him to say a few words.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Don't want to take your time that much, less than 40 minutes, inshallah. I'll wrap up the welcoming message. Thank you all for coming today. We appreciate you all from different faith. As the first Imam Ali says, to the best of his commander, he said that people in this world are either your brothers and sisters in religion, in faith, or in humanity. All the same, we're together. It's a great opportunity for us to get to know each other more. Don't worry that we close the door, you're all safe, you know. One day we had, in another center, we had the Christian friends came in, and as soon as we closed the door, they were joking, said, oh my God, they closed the door. So don't worry about this, it's all safe, inshallah. And it's a great opportunity. Thank you so much all for coming. Hopefully, this would be the beginning of many other gatherings that will see each other and will learn from each other and will help this world to be a safer place, more in peace and more tolerance, inshallah, God willing. Thank you so much to our guests. We appreciate you for coming here. And again, the doors are always open for you at ICZ. I don't guarantee that the food is already always there for you, but the door is always open for you, and hopefully we'll see you all the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maulana Hadi Yassin, your words of wisdom. Our panel today, just going to go briefly about who is going to be on our panel today. Our panel is led by Brother Ijaz, Dr. Ijaz Naqvi. He is the chair of the Intrafaith and Interfaith Committees of the Northern California Islamic Council. He is also the author of the books, The Quran with or Against the Bible and the 3 Abrahamic Testaments. He is going to be moderating our panel today. We're joined by Rabbi Roberto Grates. He is the Rabbi Emeritus at Temple Isaiah in Lafayette and has a long history of service in the Jewish community. I can testify to that because in the last 5 minutes that I talked to him, I mentioned 5 rabbis and he knew all of them. In my experience working with rabbis, you know, a couple years ago, I took a trip with 9 rabbis to Greece, and he was asking me if I got converted. That's not that easy, right? But it was quite an experience. Now, if you're a Muslim, think of traveling with 9 Maulanas. It's fun, but it was a great experience. We're also joined by Reverend Will McCarvey. He has been long active in the interfaith circles, including the early meetings that organized the interfaith chaplains in the 2012 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City. But more importantly, he's my neighbor in Walnut Creek. So we bump into each other in many, many interfaith gatherings. So good to have you here, Reverend Will. We also are joined by Sister Mahjabin Dada. She is a presidential scholar in the PhD program in the Department of Sacred Texts and their Interpretations at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. And we're looking forward, along with our resident scholar, Maulana Hadi Yassin, who I spoke a little bit about earlier, to have a great discussion today about the Abrahamic faiths. We can all learn from each other. I think there is so much commonalities in these religions, and the more time I spend with my Christian friends or my Jewish friends, I learn how much similar our religions are. And you will be surprised as to how much of these things are so similar when you start thinking about them. Before I pass on the buck to Dr. Ijaz, I want to share a quick story that in my recent travel experience, I went to Iraq and Syria a couple months ago. And these 2 countries are very sacred sites for the Shia Muslims around the world. And while it's not obligatory for us to visit these places, it's very highly recommended. So when you hear people, Shia Muslims or Muslims in general, telling you that they've been to Iraq or Syria, you know it's a spiritual journey that's tied to that. So when I went on my trip, it was my first time there, but when I got there, I was stunned because part of our group, we were joined by a reverend, a Christian reverend from Canada. His name was Reverend Andrew McPherson. And it really piqued my interest. I said, look, this is a country where it's mostly Muslims. This is a spiritual journey for Muslims. I said, Reverend, I can't stop but ask you, why are you here, right? And he said that aside from the shared history that we have, I like to travel and participate in a diversity of religious rituals and establish friendships with people of different faiths. Their stories enrich my pastoral identity and enlighten my congregation. And finally, I am sure the gospel of Jesus would like for me to be in a multi-religious and secular world and to share my knowledge with my Muslim friends. That was a classic answer I got from him, and I will never forget that. And that's, again, for me to learn from my Christian friends in a Muslim country, right? It's like thinking of, if you are a Muslim, think of going to the Vatican and being with Christians, right? So this was the opposite, and it was a phenomenal experience. With that, I will invite Brother Ijaz Naqvi to take over and start our discussion for today.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Shalom alaikum. So I'll just briefly go over what the format will be. We'll start the panel discussion with some very short speeches, 5 minutes long. But before we go over that, I just want to make sure that we understand why we are here. So we understand why we are here, but more specifically, what's the need to be here? We do know what's going on around the world. We are not oblivious to the fact that religion has been used to create fear and hate and frank violence. We have seen this in Christchurch Mosque. We have seen this in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have seen this in the churches in Sri Lanka. And these are just few of the places of worship that have been attacked. So the haters are trying to divide us. And we believe here, as the gathering shows, that our religion actually can bring us together. And this is why I think these interfaith affairs are so important. And so why is it important? Well, the world peace, and then I'll go back to 1993, the Parliament of World Religion. When we met and they had the declaration. And the declaration had 4 convictions, very simple. The first one was, there's no peace in the world without the peace among the religion first. There's no peace among religion first without dialogue. And there is no dialogue without having some global ethical standards. And so they went towards the ethical standards for dialogue. So what is interfaith dialogue? It is really getting to know each other and cherishing each other's similarities, but also talking about our differences openly. I can also talk about what is interfaith dialogue not about. I was approached once, and it's like, you've been engaged in interfaith dialogue. How many people have you converted to Islam? I said 0. He said, what? You're wasting your time. You didn't say it, but so the interfaith dialogue is not about converting people. It's not even actually about agreeing on everything. It's not about accepting each other's faith necessarily. It's about getting to know each other, realizing our similarities, and getting to know each other. There's a verse in the Quran, and let's see if it's here. O mankind, we created you from one man and one woman, and made you into different tribes and nations, so you may get to know each other. Not so you could tell who is right, who is wrong, who is superior, who is inferior. So you may get to know each other, and it goes on to say the best among you is the one who is best in common. Right? So this is the power of getting to know each other. So we do know that the haters are very active, trying to divide us. So our resolve to build bridges has to be stronger than their resolve to burn them. And this is why I think this interfaith dialogue is important, because we are gathering together today to pray together and break bread together. Because let's face it, if we pray together and we break bread together, it's very hard to hate and fear each other, right? So with that, let's just get into knowing each other. So I'll start with Reverend McGarvey. Just give us like 5 minutes about how and why the interfaith dialogue is so important.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you again for the invitation to be back with you. I think this is my 3rd time here. The first time was to meet with your imam and Dr. Ijaz, and the second time was to pray with you. I'm glad to be able to pray with you again this evening. The brother reminded us about Syria, and Syria was where Christian hymnody was invented. And I serve half-time as the executive director of the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County, which is 108 congregations, including this one, including Temple Isaiah, monasteries and retreat centers, that have the majority of their membership or a significant minority in Contra Costa County. We have a contract with the county for the interfaith juvenile chaplain at the Martinez Juvenile Hall and the Warren Allen Byron Boys Ranch in Byron. And we do a lot of interfaith programming. And among the programs that we do, one we started about 15 years ago called Winter Nights Rotating Shelter. It's a family shelter for families with children. It operates inside of our congregations, and they move every 2 weeks to a different congregation. And multiple congregations, the host congregation and other co-hosts come and feed the people that we serve. We have about 30 people in our program right now. It's ending Monday at my congregation in Pittsburgh, where we are hoping to be able to expand an additional rotating shelter into East County in the next 2 years. And so that's an opportunity for you to be able to serve people that are living without shelter. When they're at Temple Isaiah, it's usually over Christmas week. The Jews take it for the Christians while they're celebrating Christmas, and the Unitarians take it over Easter. And then it's in other Muslim and Jewish and Christian congregations coming together to be able to serve those that are most in need. We also do a lot of programming in the area, and this last year we've been doing a lot with compassion retreats at San Damiano Retreat Center in Danville, which is nearby. And we also have, so we've been doing monthly retreats there. We had one on Buddhism, one with Jewish leadership, one with Hindu leadership, and tomorrow afternoon's Islamic Sufism. And then we'll take a break this summer, and in the fall we'll have one on paganisms, Baha'i, Sikhism, and multiple Christianities. And so we recognize the great diversity among the different faith traditions, and that sometimes the dialogues that go on intra-faith are as harder than the ones that you may have with interfaith. And so the more we have these conversations, the more we understand that the subtle nuances of how our faith leads us to be people of conscience and value. And then when we see religious minorities being targeted anywhere in the world, we're often the ones called upon to make statements in support of them and against the violence that we've been seeing and against the fanaticism that we're seeing in different parts of the world. And the other half of my life I spend as a pastor of a Presbyterian United Church of Christ congregation in Pittsburgh. And sometimes that means I get to hang out with the Winter Nights Rotating Shelter like this week, and other times I'm leading worship there and teaching. We just have a new hymnal we just came out with about 5 years ago, and one of the hymns in there is called Assalamu Alaikum. So I'm going to teach it to you, and I'll sing it once through in Arabic and then in English, and then you're welcome to join me for the second round. How's that? Assalamu alaikum, assalamu alaikum, salam, salam, assalamu alaikum, peace of God be with you, peace of God be with you, shalom, shalom, peace of God be with you. Assalamu alaikum, assalamu alaikum, salam, salam, assalamu alaikum, peace of God be with you, peace of God be with you, shalom, shalom, peace of God be with you.
So the next one, so just going back to the panel conversation, so there'll be very brief monologues by our panelists. We'll hopefully finish by 8 o'clock. After that, we want to make this very interactive. So you will have the volunteers handing out the index cards. So whatever question you may have about another faith, interfaith dialogue, whatever else question you may have, please write it down. I'll get the questions and I'll be asking our panelists the questions. So please use this opportunity to ask questions. So without further ado, I have Rabbi Roberto Grace. So thank you for joining our center. And his bio is in the back. And Will, if you could actually move back so they won't accuse me of talking behind your back. So,
I'll be very brief because if we want to have questions, that's probably the most important part of our program. And we need to know that questions are always so much more important than answers, because the question tells us where we're coming from. I greet you from our Jewish community in Contra Costa, and I hope that the fast of Ramadan will be both an opportunity for each of you to go deeply inside and to develop vision outside. I was asked to talk a little bit about fasting in our tradition. And I don't think fasting in our tradition is different than fasting in other traditions. We've been around a long time, so we had a lot of different kinds of fasts. And I suspect, studying the Bible, that we fasted much more in ancient times than we're prone to do now. And that fasting was much more spontaneous, as we needed to express be proximate to God, as we needed to expiate guilt, as we needed to heal ourselves from physical illness. It was individual, it wasn't mandated, it was spontaneous. But religion has a way of bringing things together and regulating them and making laws and when and how and why. And a little bit of the spontaneous ends up getting lost. But the profound meaning of fasting remains. Fasting in the Jewish tradition to this day is a way of expressing atonement. Atonement for sins, for faults, for errors we have committed in our lives. But the fast is not what atones. The fast is sort of the last step in the process of setting right what we did wrong, of reaching to the other and asking for forgiveness, of committing ourselves not to repeat what we did and facing an identical situation, not doing it actually, changing our conduct. And then we fast. And then the fast, in its end, in its late hours, becomes joyful. Why? Because fasting leads us to this spiritual insight, to a vision of who we are ourselves, to self-reflection, self-analysis. And we discover the possibility that each of us, no matter where we come from, can be better. So fasting as atonement, but fasting also as spiritual insight. It is through fasting that we reach out to God, that we try to encounter closeness with God, not distracted by the material things in our lives. In the fast of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, it's not just a day of not eating, it's a day of abstaining for all labor. It's a day of abstaining from washing and clothing and putting perfumes on ourselves, of cohabiting, of having relations with our loved ones. It's just to be with ourselves and with our God. And fasting, finally, in our tradition, is a way to develop compassion based on empathy and not on pity. Reverend Macaulay spoke about the work the Interfaith Council does in reaching out to the homeless and the poor in our communities. It is our religious duty we do so. It is compassion based on empathy. Is when at the end of the day you feel in your gut that you're lacking something, that you begin to understand the one that lacks something every night. Our tradition teaches that we're all descendants of one, the first human, Adam. And why is the tradition so insistent that we are created from one? So that no one ever can say, my blood is redder than yours. My origin is nobler than yours. We're all the same when we're striving for holiness.
Beautiful. So, if you did not know Rabbi Grace was a rabbi, everything you said actually could have been actually from a Muslim perspective. I mean, you could be at the Maulana Roberto Jones.
Well, I'm not sure about that one.
Right. So we have about 3 to 5 minutes for each speaker before we'll open up for question and answer. So as you're listening to them, please make sure that you're writing down questions. We should have at least half an hour of question and answer. So next up, I'll invite our own Maulana Sayyid Hadi Yassin, and he will address the Muslim perspective.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon all of you. Very quickly, I don't know how that your judge is. If you ask the time, we will definitely catch you up, so we have to be careful here. The ultimate goal of all human beings in this world is to reach peace. All scientists, psychologists, sociologists, they work together to make this world more peaceful and a place that we would like to live in. But it looks like just the secular aspects of this world fail to bring peace to humanity, which we see that there is another need, as you heard from the other speeches, that the need to find peace from another source, which we call it the source of peace, which is God, which is the divine source. As religion comes in, divinity comes in, and introduces the true peace. This is where we have to find the peace in order to be able to successfully live in this world. But unfortunately, there's a huge enemy towards this, which we call it ignorance. And religion, I believe, is one of the most innocent and abused things throughout the history of the world. That people tend to, change and alternate the messages of religion based on their own personal ideas and personal interests. That's why you see that they try to confront religions against each other, and they try to attack religions by bringing ignorance to people. All this hatred that you see, bigotry that you see, the problem throughout the world that you see. I was doing some research within, a decade ago, how many attacks we had to the places of worship. So it looks like they're targeting, attacking one thing, and it looks like the source is a common source, which is what we call it, for example, ignorance, that they are against the peace for humanity and against everyone. What we see here is that the interfaith opportunity and the dialogue that we have, such as today, will provide opportunity to be against that. So we do not let those who are against the peace and the progress of humanity and human beings to take advantage of this opportunity. As Islam, as the Quran is saying that, قُلْ تَعَالَوْا إِلَىٰ كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ لَا تُشْرِكُوا. If you want to talk, if you want to share your thoughts with people of book, which in Quran, based on Quran, Christian and Judaism, make sure you talk about those common words that on top of all is that we worship one God. We have the same thing. Why you should always focus on the differences? Yeah, people are different, as you heard the ayah of Quran that Dr. Ijazi showed to you. Quran says that we created you purposely from different nations, different tribes, and that's one of the beauties of this dunya, this world, right? Imagine if today we will all look the same, it would be very boring, like who is who, you know? One of the differences is that it's beautiful. You see different faces, you don't get tired. Imagine the whole nature was the same all the time. It would be so boring for us, right? Different languages, different faith, different beliefs that we have, different nationalities that we have. These are all part of the creation of God. So one thing that God wants, and I think all Abrahamic religions, they want us to follow based on whatever we're following, is to be able to tolerate and to respect each other. Yes, we're following this, you're following something else, but the most important thing, as we've seen in the history and the teachings of the prophets, we see this concept that you have to respect. You have to improve your knowledge, but you have to respect each other. We see in Islam, against all these propagations against Islam and Islamic, teachings, is that in one city, the Prophet of Islam established, in one city they're living with Christian and Jewish community, and not only that, they are in charge of the safety of the Christian and Jewish of the community. The Prophet of Islam is, and he led them to practice whatever they want to do and live with each other in peace. Now we see nowadays the ignorance comes with some personal purposes and some political purposes maybe behind this as well. That we see that some people are against each other. Some people are, hurting each other for the sake of, you don't have the same beliefs as me. And that's unfortunately is not only among Abrahamic religions. We see that, for example, right now among the Buddhists, which is supposed to be the most peaceful religion. We see that in Myanmar, what's going on, that there are killing and burning innocent people, innocent men and women and children. You see that unfortunately it looks like we have a common enemy here. This ignorance is attacking all faith and religions and religiosity. So that's why I think the more we get together, the more we try to understand each other for the sake of just knowing more knowledge and to know each other. I always say even husband and wife, when they get married, one of the most important issues that I've seen in them is that they don't know each other. They assume, they have a lot of assumption against each other. Once they sit down and communicate with each other, they learn how to communicate throughout the steps of communication. Then they'll respect each other more. Then they tolerate each other. Then they get along with each other more. I think this is a great, look at this. Different people, different ages, all below, alhamdulillah, 100 years old. So all young here, all together. Some of them are hungry, some of them are not hungry, different colors, look at this, how amazing. Look around right now, look around. How amazing is this image, right? If you take this image and show it to someone, different religion, this is what we need throughout the whole world. And the more we expand this, the bigger this become, the more hatred, the more ignorance go away. The more we just stand away from each other and have assumption. If I've never been in any synagogue or any church, then I would have just assumption. What are they doing over there? Are you lying? But when I enter and see that this can be the house of God, and they're worshiping the God over there, right? It gives me better understanding as we're living in the society, very great society that we all live with each other. Our neighbors might be Muslim, Christian, Jews, or atheists, doesn't matter. We tend to live next to each other. Our co-workers and colleagues can be from different faiths. We tend to respect each other, and we have to. And if we know more about each other, then believe me, no one can abuse religion anymore to come and say, this is the best word. No, as we have the authorities, the scholars of different religions, they should speak. Those who are definitely in the right path of the religion, they should speak so we know more about the religions. And I think this will provide a great opportunity for us to be able to, as I said, bring that peace back to the world. And again, people are free from choosing their path, but what we need to do to stay with the most common recommendations of religions, which number one, this is the common among all Abrahamic religions, monotheism, that we believe in one God. And then one God is ordering us that we should respect and tolerate each other and each other's faith. This is the worst thing, that someone disrespects someone else based on that faith. And hopefully this type of gatherings would give us more opportunity. And as I said, spread the word, talk to other people, see what we're doing here. Hopefully you will be invited to the church and synagogue and other places as well, so we can start this. One thing I want to, I know you're just showing me the sign. One thing I want to say that this should not be a formal this gathering that just wanted to have it for the sake of, yeah, take some pictures and go home and say, yeah, we had something like that. I think we have to make it more practical. We have to go to the next step. That can be the beginning, but what are the next steps? What can we do? This is more formal gathering, but next step, sit down with more community members, talk about the details. So they know that, for example, in Islam, we don't believe in certain things, the majority of things that the media are, showing to people. By what? By bringing the text, the messages, and I think that would bring more knowledge to people, which would help them to fight with ignorance, hopefully. Thank you so much.
I was very careful showing our Maulana the sign because, I may lose my membership. Without further ado, I'm going to invite Sister Majidina.
Assalamu alaikum everybody, greetings of peace to one and all. I've been working and studying with the Christian-Muslim dialogue at the Dominican School of Theology and Philosophy in Berkeley, and I'm also a regular participant and a speaker at the Midrasha program that we have at the GTU. So with all this experience, I've realized one thing, that diversity is around and will stay around. And there is no, putting effort into eliminating diversity is not going to go anywhere. We have to embrace it. And in this very short talk that we are supposed to deliver today, I would like to look and ask you to share 3 thoughts with me. One is in the line of faith, the other is in the line of practice, and the third is in the line of action. And when we think faith, I think in this room we are all monotheistic, and especially in this panel we represent a monotheistic religion. If you would be reading a book by Mahmoud Ayub, he would call this meeting not interfaith but more ecumenical. That is what he would call it. And if you would be reading King, he would tell you that this is actually believers sitting down to plan their future. We're all believers because we all go back to that one God. And in that monotheistic understanding of Islam, where we are in this month of fasting, I know when fasting comes up, we have this hype about being spiritual. We're being told you're human beings, and now you need to practice spirituality. But for me, I think fast is not just that. If we're monotheistic, we have an understanding that we are spiritual beings. By fasting, we're trying to become a little more human. I think fasting is an exercise in humanity. It's developing humanity. Because through fasting, we are asked to feel the pangs of hunger that any hungry person would feel on the street, irrespective of what religion or what faith they came from. And before we celebrate our Eid at the end of 30 days of fasting, we are told it is only legitimate for you to share that celebration if you are able to pay a tax or a charity with which someone who cannot afford to have a celebration will be able to have one. So I think my faith and the way I understand fasting in my faith is asking me or telling me, hey, you're spiritual enough. You need to know how to be more humane, and you need to develop your humanity. When I think of practice, 3 things just jump out my mind right now in this congregation. The one practice I think which an interfaith can help us develop is hospitality, and that is what we're doing here. You're all welcome here, and I'm sure we're all welcome in other places of worship, because this is one grain that all monotheistic relationships share, and that is hospitality. We have the example of Abraham, who would not sit down to eat until he would have someone to break bread with. We have the example of Mary, who would give away her part of the bread to all those who lined up outside the temple to see her. We have the example of the Prophet's family, who fasted for 3 days and gave away their bread to those who were orphans and needy and hungry. The second thing that comes to me with practice is about the dignity of labor. All these things I think are so much more needed now, here, in our lives, than just in our sacred text. We have the dignity of labor. Where are we? We're here, represented by Christianity, where Jesus, we know, was a carpenter who would make these works of art and necessity for people. We know that our Prophet Muhammad was a merchant. Imam Ali alayhi salam would knead his own bread. He would knead his own dough and make his own bread. We are a tradition that respects labor and has dignity for labor. A third practice that comes to my mind is that about eradication of poverty. We have the anecdote of Imam Sadiq at a time when famine had struck Medina and people were hoarding wheat. He asked his servants to release as much wheat they had in their stores into the market. Because he said, at these points, a person of God would not hoard and let the price of wheat rise. They would let out their hoards into the market so that there could be an equilibrium for the poor man. So we are a tradition of dignity of labor, of hospitality, of eradication of poverty. And now I come to my last point, and that is the action, the thought of action that I'd like for us to think. Like it or not, we have bad blood. We have a history of conflict. We can go back and we can start blaming and start pointing fingers. This one bombed this, and that one spoiled that, and that one burned that. We can't wipe away that history. There is conflict in our history, but there is also pain. And I think pain, however much it hurts, it also has the potential to unite people. It has the potential for collaboration. The mother who lost her son or daughter at Christchurch, or at Thousand Oaks, or at that synagogue in San Diego, feels the same pain, feels the same pain. And if in today's world, the thing that can bring us together is this pain that comes out of conflict, where we can start building bridges. I leave you with this last thought. I leave you with this last thought, especially to my brothers and sisters who share my faith. What if today Imam Ali would be with you in this prayer, and would be with your sufra, on your spread, eating with you? What would he say to the situation we are in today? What would Jesus say? The Quran specifically talks of a verse where we are waiting for Jesus for the hour to come. What would Jesus say when he would be with us, praying, seeing the situation, the misery, the human misery around us? What would Moses do if he would be sharing our bread with us today, or standing up in prayer with us today? Thank you for listening to me.
I have a proposal. I think we need to invite Sister Majmudala even to address the men, because I've been very unfortunate belonging to the male gender. I hardly get to hear your speeches, so I'd love to hear more of you. So we are done with the monologue in many speeches, so this is the time to start to ask questions. And so if you have the index card ready, volunteers, if you could actually hand them to me, and I'll ask the questions to our panelists. And so while we are waiting, I'm going to, Sister Majmin, I'm going to ask you the first question from me, which is, you started to mention the conflict. So we know the bad blood, but we also believe that our faith actually can bring us closer together. So there's a lot of bad blood between Christians and Muslims, and bad blood between Jews and Muslims, and Christians and Jews. What specifically would you recommend as the next step, the pragmatic step, that we, this community, not the thinking big, but just us, can do at an individual level and at a community level to bring peace between us? We need the microphone.
So thank you for that question. I just wanted to point out to that conflict because we can't escape it. Whether you're in an academic setup, you're looking at colonialism, you're looking at the 7-Eleven, the Spanish Inquisitions. You're reading all this history, so naturally it's all there with us. But there's one thing that we've started to do, at least in Berkeley, and perhaps this could be, this could sort of, in some measure, be an answer to your question or a proposition for us to look into future. We have readings from the sacred text. We understand that it might not be the religion itself that is breeding this hatred, but it might be the projection of institutionalized forms of religions that could be getting people into conflict. So we started this project with actually looking at sacred texts. And two of my colleagues, one from the Christian tradition and one from the Jewish tradition, we got together and we started looking at women's voices within the sacred text. So we brought the Quran, we took the Old Testament and we took the New Testament, and we sat down and we started looking social equity and social justice within our books. And that was one way of moving forward, bringing people together, sit down. We actually had an event where we invited K to 12 teachers and shared that pedagogy with themselves. And they said that they were really enlightened by looking into the sacred text. So I think that is one way of moving forward and sort of going beyond the curtain to our actual sacred text rather than the projection or interpretations of it that we are offered in our institutions.
Thank you. So I would also encourage, because we have many questions, and we have only about 20 minutes before we'll start to break for the prayer. So if you can limit the answers to about 3 minutes. And this is a sensitive subject, and Rabbi Grace, I'm going to actually ask you this question from the audience. And so we hear about the Jews, but we also hear about Zionism. Could you explain the difference between the two, if there is a difference? And you only have 3 minutes to discuss.
Zion stands for the holy mountain where the temple stood, where the mosque stands today. The direction of Jewish prayer historically was towards Zion. Jews pray towards Zion and hope for the return. Zionism is the political movement developed at the end of the 19th century that started striving for reconstituting a Jewish commonwealth in the land of Israel. There is a fine line in our conversations today between Judaism and Zionism, between when is criticism of Israeli policies bordering into criticism of all things Jewish. And we have to tread carefully. We have to tread carefully. We can be critical of things that happen in the Holy Land, of injustices that are committed, and they're not in the name of Judaism. So there is a distinction. Zionism was a political movement that in its essence finishes with the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. But it still speaks to the longing of the Jewish people in their connection to the land. And I'll leave it there. But it's one of the sources of conflict and one of the things that makes it so difficult to talk with each other. And we have to recognize it, we have to acknowledge it, and we have to be able to move beyond it. And I think that happens one-on-one. When we talk about what we can do, I think that the beginning of what we can do is create relationships. It's to know the other. When we don't know the other, we live, or we bring alive the worst images we can have of the other. We never think of the best or the better. So, but if we know the other, then we automatically, as we was said before, we break bread together, we study together, we pray together. We begin to break the barriers and see the distinctions. There are things in each of us that we love, and things in each of us that we may not like that much.
Thank you. So my next question is to Imam Ali Yassin Saab. And it's actually come up 2 or 3 questions along the same line. So I'll just actually not quote question, but just go to the gist of it, which is their representation from Abrahamic faiths, Jews and Christians and Muslims. What about having dialogue with atheists and polytheists? And how does that fit into interfaith dialogue?
Yeah. I think we have to start from somewhere, right? We have to start, as Quran is ordering us and recommending us to start with those who are having the common base with you. And we're talking about Abrahamic religions. There are a lot of commonality among Islam, Christianity, and Judaism that I think would be a great point. At the same time, I believe myself personally, we have to move for something more practical. And if we want to do something practical, you have to find those groups that are having more things in common with you than others. With all the respect to anybody else, but I think when we talk about interfaith, when we talk about faith, there should be something in common with faith, right? If the common ground, the core beliefs are against each other, then what are we going to talk about the faith? We might sit down and talk about humanity, respect each other, and the society, and sociology, all the things, right? But if we want to have a dialogue about the faith and how the faith should be the same, I believe something should be in common, and as we know, Abrahamic religions are having all those in common.
Thank you. So there are more questions than we have time, unfortunately. So this is what I would recommend. I'm not going to be able to go through all of them. The panelists will stay here, I'm hoping, after the iftar or during iftar dinner. So please do contact them one-on-one, see if you can actually get their answers, the one that you did not get during this. I'm going to actually ask Reverend Bill McGarvey some specific question, which is, you mentioned the winter nights. How can the Zahra Center, this is a very specific question, congregation engagement, if you will. How can the Zahra Center community help out and be part of the winter nights program?
Well, one way, because it's operating mainly in central Contra Costa County, and I think the furthest south it comes is St. Timothy's Episcopal Church in Danville, but it's also being hosted by San Ramon Valley United Methodist and a few other churches in that area. The host congregation always has co-hosts that will come in for 1 or 2 nights or even a whole week. And so I would try to partner with one of those congregations and develop a team of 9 or 10 people that can volunteer to provide the food, but also to provide tutoring or read with children for each of those nights, and be able to even share some of the gifts of the food from your own culture with the folks that are the clients in the program, and partner with some of those other congregations. That's the easiest way to do it. Or look to ways that you can serve people living without shelter here in Pleasanton. That's another option. The other thing that I'll mention briefly about the question you asked your mom. I was at an interfaith event in Rossmore on Thursday, and the speaker, one of the speakers was from the Ananda community, which is a Hindu community in Palo Alto. And I asked him if he was polytheist, and he said no. We often make assumptions about other people's faith traditions without asking them. And if we ask people about their own faith tradition, sometimes they will surprise us. And though they're not Abrahamic, they have a faith tradition that really points to the Atman, the guiding principle of the unity of God, even though their devotional life might take on multiple expressions with devotions to different expressions of that one divine divinity through different rituals that come from different parts of India. But because we import and project Western categories, especially in the academy, onto other traditions, we oftentimes miss the nuances of other traditions when they get to speak for themselves. And I think we need to stop making assumptions. This is actually one of the best lessons I've learned from pagans, as I've learned how to pray with pagans, is not to assume anything of another person's faith, but ask them what they believe and how they express that in their own faith traditions and in their own spiritual practices.
Thank you. Well, let me ask you, so there's in the worst of the Quran, we heard about the attacks on synagogues and churches, and especially you hear about Muslims attacking churches, especially in the Middle East, and there's a verse in the Quran that I'm pretty sure our Muslim brothers and sisters know, but there's a verse in the Quran that says, if Allah had not repelled the might of some people with the might of others, the monasteries and the churches and the synagogues and the mosques where God's praises are daily celebrated would have been utterly demolished. And God helped those who help His cause. So protecting the churches and the mosque and the synagogue is actually a common duty. So I know some of us did not get that memo. So short question. By the way, I will encourage you to write short questions. There are actually questions that are actually on both sides, and like every single line is used. For Sheikh Ali Yassin, what's the best way for Muslims to, and this actually could be for all of us, all of the panelists, what's the best way for Muslims to fight Islamophobia?
To fight Islamophobia? Well, I think the best way is to get to the origin, to read more about, very nice quote from Imam Ali Sallallahu. He says, first go learn about the truth, and then you will see who is telling you the truth. Don't look at people to find what is a religion. Go learn about the religion to see who is fit into that religion or not. So I think now it's opposite nowadays. People tend to judge each other based on, oh, he belongs to that religion, she belongs to here, they belong to this. This way, I think the media are the best way to mess up the whole mind of people about, okay, what is what. But I think if we, according to the levels, we go learn more about the, what is Islam, what is Quran. I recommend you just get the Quran, start reading the translation of the Quran, the phrases of the Quran. I've been invited to one of the churches in Dallas that every Sunday they had Islamic studies. I was very surprised. A group of Christians that were sitting next to each other, I think it was almost like 40 people, you know, all just Christian, no Muslim among them. And they had one of the Islamic books, and they were following the books and learning about the Islamic, points and recommendations and everything. And of course, when they saw a scholar, they invited me to go and talk to them. So I think this is what we have to do. In other religions, the same thing. Instead of saying, oh, he's Christian, he attacked those, and hurt those, or he was Jew and he attacked someone else, or he said something. I think instead of learning or judging based on the cover, let's go inside the book and learn. And I think that's the best way that we can fight Islamophobia.
And I'm going to reverse the question for Rabbi Grace. How do you fight anti-Semitism? And Bill, I know you work very hard on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and I'll come back to you, but if you can hear from Rabbi Grace.
So we live in very dark times where fear often seems to trump hope. And I think we have to stand on the side of hope. People of faith need to stand on the side of hope and not on the side of fear. And if we do that, then we can see the course, we can see the way, we can see the end to which we all are aspiring. And we can come together. There is no formula to find phobias. Phobias are fomented. Phobias are cemented. Phobias are designed not to solve problems, but to stir problems. The best way is to tell ourselves every morning as we leave our homes, every person I encounter is in the image of God. And where is God to be found if not in the midst of you looking at me and I looking at you? And that's where God is. And if we look away, then God is not. How do we fight? We fight with understanding. We fight with learning. We fight with tolerance. We fight with walking together. How do we react when something happens to the other? We stand to protect. One of the most meaningful things that came out of the horrific shootings in synagogues, churches, and mosques is the fact that in every community there was a core of good people that said, we are going to stand in a circle around your place of worship so that you can worship in peace and not worry about being attacked. If we can sustain each other at every moment with that spirit, we will not finish with the fear-mongers, but we will let hope come back in the door.
We'll go to address that question, and then I have a question for Sister Majid.
One of the ways I think we do this is by making sure, like we're doing tonight, I have a policy now, I will no longer be on a panel that does not include a woman. And that's one of the ways that I'm decolonizing my own Christianity as well as my interfaith spirituality. And one of the big faux pas that happened at the 2015 Parliament of the World's Religions is that they planned their big conference in Salt Lake City, and there was a women's conference beforehand, and only 500 men showed up, but there were 3,000 women. And then when the conference officially began, all there were official rev, imam, or rabbi, or other male leaders on the dais, and you could feel the air leave the room because they went from this inclusive place to this tiny place where the voices of the female religious leaders, and there are always religious leaders who are female in every tradition, whether they're accounted as clergy or not, were not given a place. And they repented, and they changed, and it never happened again, even in Toronto. So I think that's one way. I think the other way is for those of us, especially for myself, a part of a faith community that has, and a tradition that has been co-opted by colonial enterprises, both in its relationship with Judaism. Martin Luther said some horrible things about Judaism as a way of trying to get people to convert from Catholicism to his Protestant Reformation. And it led to pogroms and thousands of deaths during his time, and we don't remember that history nearly as much as we need to recognize that it wasn't just a theological reformation, it was a total disruption of European culture, and that the language that Martin Luther used in the 16th century was used in the 20th century by Hitler and his movement to try to erase a whole religion and people in Eastern Europe and Northern Europe. And we have to recognize that colonialism and how it gets used in different faith traditions, and even the conflict between Christianity and Islam that has simmered and I think is coming out in the conflicts that we've seen in the last 100 years are a function of the original sin of Islamophobia during the Crusades. And we have to remember, and as a Christian I have to tell the stories that it was Western Christians who not only killed Muslims and Jews in Jerusalem because they couldn't tell the difference between a Muslim and a Jew. They couldn't even recognize who the Eastern Christians were, and they killed them as well. And this colonialism needs to be stripped from our faith traditions, and we need to be able to have those internal conversations that claims a new way of being Christian without that colonialism in order to move forward.
I guess that will start in November 2020. So, Sister Majbeen, and I have one last question for the rest of the panel, then we'll break. The questions are kind of related here, and again, unfortunately this is a short question but a very long answer, I guess. What's the difference between Shias and Sunnis?
Wow. I think the short answer to this short question, which has a long answer, is that they should just look at the YouTube of the LCIS that we had the Sunni Muslim and the Sunni Shia dialogue. I think that would be the best, shortest answer for you to just go to that website and look it up. It's two different sects of the same book and the same prophet, which somehow split because of political reasons, and then that political reason had ramifications on their theology and their practice as well. That's it.
the last question. So what it tells me is that I think next time we plan these events, we'll have to have more time for question and answers, that you can tell. And I apologize for all of you where I did not address your question because we are running out of time. So the last question I have for Rabbi and our Imam, resident scholar, and also we'll be quick, maybe 30-second sound bites, if you will. What can we do specifically at the clergy level and individual level as our next step to promote interfaith harmony?
Build relationships. Knock at your neighbor's door. If he has a mezuzah in it, he's a Jew. If he doesn't, he probably isn't. But no matter. Knock on your neighbor's door and establish a relationship. Break down the differences and look for the commonalities on the street level, on the people level. Of course, on the scholar level, we need to study each other's texts. We need to study each other's interpretations of the text. No text stands alone through time. All text is interpreted. We need to go into that. We need to work together. In Lafayette, my colleague Rabbi Shank some years ago started Neighbor to Neighbor, groups that exist till today. And they study together, they read books together, they break bread together, and they become friends with each
I'm
other.
going to put you on the spot. Are the doors open for Zahra Center? I know it's kind of Contra Costa related, but are we limited?
I have a very easy out because I'm retired now, so I don't know the answer to that. But the answer is yes, I think the doors are open to increasing these circles, these neighbor-to-neighbor circles, and keep reinforcing the need for us to stand together and to be seen together and not separate.
Thank you. And we'd like to break at 8:35 because that will give us about 6 minutes to rearrange the area for prayer. And just to let you know, when we start the prayer, there will be call or adhan, call to prayer. These rows will be realigned slightly to face Kaaba, and men will be standing in the front, and the ladies will go in the back. And then we'll break for adhan.
Same question? All right. I believe the first step is that the scholars get together and try to learn more from each other. You know, any extremism, I think, starts with the leaders. They brainwash people. There's some people that they are ignorant themselves and they brainwash other people or give them wrong answers. So I think the best way is that to ourselves to educate each other more about, regularly different sessions together to be able to learn more from each other. Second, I think we have to bring this mentality to our congregation, out to people, to make them ready and provide this opportunity for them to have this mentality that they have to learn from each other without a fear. Some people have a fear, oh, why should we do that? What if something happened? Well, respect people's mentality and ideas and talents and what they know, right? They choose the best. Therefore, I think what we have to do, number one, is to educate ourselves, to talk to people, and then provide opportunities like this dialogue, more and more. Definitely more time, more questions, the details people can ask. To break this formality, I think the best way is just to dive into and dissect the faith. Let's question. Let's talk about those questions that bothered us for a long time. Why Christianity doing this? Why Judaism is? Why Islam is saying this? I think to the details. If people have more chance, without a stigma or fear, to talk about question details respectfully, of course, I think we will be able to help this whole mentality more.
Well, thank you. So, if you could
Very
finish the
quickly,
line, yes.
after the Tree of Life Synagogue, the Jewish Federations put out an invite, show up for Shabbat. Go worship with Jews. After the shootings at the mosques, the Muslim community did the same thing, and we've just put the call out to everyone. You're invited, you're automatically invited as part of interfaith work to go worship with other people. If you If you desire to let folks know that you're a part of the interfaith community and you're there to learn how to pray for peace with them, that you're a practitioner of a certain faith tradition, continue to practice your faith, but show up and pray for peace with others.
Thank you. And then just to remind everyone else, the Interfaith Council did what we call Ring of Solidarity around Mosque, Sonoma Valley, Walnut Creek, and so that's just to show the support from within the community. So we are a little bit behind, and so I'm going to end here, but I'd like to actually have our committee members, Brother Hasnain, who is the trustee, if you can stand up. Sister Nazli, she's the chairwoman for the Interfaith Committee, and Brother Abbas, and myself. So, and Sister Zoreen. Zoreen, where are you? If you can stand up, please. So they worked very hard to make this happen. So, and plus all the volunteers. Can we give a round of applause for all the this concludes the
Thank you, Brother Ijaz, for putting together a wonderful program today. I think we all learned quite a few things. While this might be the end of the formal program for today, our scholars and our guests are going to be here for dinner. So if your question wasn't asked, just because Dr. Ijaz didn't ask it, you can go directly to any of our guests after the program and ask them your questions. In fact, I would encourage you, if your question is not answered, please meet with any of our guests and ask your questions. Secondly, a special request to our community members today. If you see people that are guests here from outside, please go forward to them, introduce yourself to them, and make them feel comfortable. This might be new for them. It's just like when you go to a church, you want to be welcomed. When you go to a synagogue, you want to be welcomed. If you see somebody sitting by themselves, please go to them and sit and eat with them and make them feel at home. Ask them hard questions about their religion, right? Again, I want to thank everybody who has showed up here with their neighbors, with their guests. Thank you for coming. And this is, as Maulana said, this is the first step. And we need to take the next step forward. And we can go to him for guidance on what is the next step and how we can do it as an individual and as a community. With that, we will conclude our program. What's going to happen next is we're going to, as Brother Ijaz said, we're going to realign. This is going to be a prayer hall. For our guests, you can sit and watch us or you can join us, whatever you want. But the dinner will be served after the prayers. And so during the prayers, I request everybody to maintain some silence so we can have our prayers in peace. With that, thank you, everybody. All the ladies, please move towards the back. The men will be praying in front and the ladies will be at the back. If anybody wants to watch, they can sit in the chairs. That's for our guests on the sideline who say our prayers.
She's always on the plane. My kids, when they were little, they